Now, almost a decade since the Arab Spring began, the wave of protests that topple veteran leaders across the region has led to a more complicated political reality than the first demonstrators could have anticipated. From Libya to a still continuing war in Syria. I'm joined now by Hazem Kandil. He's an author and reader in political sociology at the University of Cambridge, and he studies power relations in revolution and war, focusing on the Middle East, Western Europe and North America. Hazem, good to have you with us in the studio. Let's start with Egypt, first of all, with the recent death of Hosni Mubarak at the age of 91, the autocratic former president who was toppled during the Arab Spring protests in Tahrir Square. There's been much reflections on those days. Could Tahrir ever happen again? Was it just a moment in time?
I think there's been a loss of appetite for revolution in Egypt and also across the Arab world. And the reason for that, I think, is that the dominant narrative has been one that highlighted the disruption, lawlessness, instability that was associated with revolts. And so people are now tend to prefer stability over the costly campaigns for achieving more freedom and change.
Egypt now has another strongman president, Sisi, who seized power in a military coup. He's overseen crackdown on civil society and free speech. Where does Egypt go from here?
Well, I think there's a bit of fluidity still in the Egyptian situation. One of the reasons is repression, durable repression, if you will, requires one security agency to be carrying out domestic control. This has been the case in Egypt before 2011 with the Ministry of Interior. However, since 2011, there has been at least 3 or 4 agencies that have been playing that role. And this is a recipe for turf battles and confusion and has yet to consolidate. And the other element is the ruling party. I think most Arab dictators rely on a royal family or ruling party. And this has also been the case in Egypt before. But the ruling party that has been dissolved in 2011 has yet to be replaced. There's only the president and his staff, one technocratic cabinet after the other, and that cannot last for very long.
Okay, let's move on then to Syria and its brutal ongoing civil war. I mean, the original protesters wanting to overthrow Assad, they could never have imagined the horrors that lay ahead. We've been hearing today in the news that Russia and Turkey have agreed to a ceasefire in Idlib. But it's difficult to predict how the crisis is going to unfold, what the end game is going to be.
Well, there has been a number of these ceasefires. I think everyone hopes this one will hold for the civilian suffering. But what is absent still is any viable roadmap for ending this conflict, which will require reconciling, I think, Syrian society after almost a decade of unspeakable violence, resettling millions of refugees, and of course resolving the claims of foreign actors who have been critical in that struggle, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. I don't think this has come out of these discussions yesterday, and I unfortunately don't see a quick end to this conflict anytime soon.
And of course, we have these global players involved, and as Washington appears to step back from the international scene, we have Russia, Turkey. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think one of the unintended consequences of the Arab revolts is that it has caused a shift in the policies of Europe and the US. I think that European governments have been championing popular demands for change in the 1990s and 2000s. Refugee crisis have obviously caused them to U-turn on that and go back to supporting strong men that can keep a lid on their societies. And the US is revisiting the merits of isolationism, especially when it comes to the Middle East. And this has, of course, given the opportunity to other players, such as Russia, to step in more aggressively in support of dictators than it would have done before.
Yeah, sure. Now, big question, but what did the Arab Spring achieve? We're looking at nearly a decade on. There was so much hope for change.
Well, I think, unfortunately, there hasn't been much to show for it. The Tunisian example is held as a success case, and it might be. But I think the immediate consequence has been that the very slim margin for opposition and dissent that has been available as a safety valve for popular frustration has been very firmly shut after these revolts. because regimes have realized that this has been used to outmaneuver them and mobilize under their noses, so to speak. And so if it has achieved any positive outcomes, perhaps they still need to reveal themselves in the fullness of time, but nothing we can detect at the moment.
Now, looking ahead, a third of the Arab world is under 15. They'll barely remember the beginning of the Arab Spring. And another third, aged between 15 and 29, they're well versed in social media, online technologies. What does that mean for the future, and what changes can we expect to see?
Well, like most things, I think we discovered that social media is a double-edged sword. And you're right, in 2011, it was the quintessential weapon of youth to mobilize. However, I think regimes very quickly caught on, and they have used social media against youth, not just as a means of surveillance and monitoring, and it's very effective in that, but also to propagate their own discourse that is fueling rumors, fake news, and dividing society further.
Hazem, great to have you here. Thank you very much for your insight into that, and lots to watch there. Thank you very much indeed.